It began with a tickling in the back of my nose. A cold coming on, or an allergy, some springtime pollen which would dissipate as the summer progressed. If it stayed as it was, a gentle but persistent nuisance, then I think I would have gotten used to it and not have even noticed before long. Day by day the pressure of the incessant tickle increased. The air in my apartment took on a greasy quality, an irritation that never quite went away. It was getting warmer though, and I didn't mind keeping the windows open all the time. I bought one of those lemon-scented air fresheners that automatically releases throughout the day and put it beside my bed. The next week I bought 2 more for my living room and kitchen, but the malodorous intrusion would always find a way through anyway. Rotten eggs, burning sulfur, noxious and nauseating. My nose and eyes were softly burning all the time, and it made working from home an absolute nightmare. There was no real escape though, because the smell had so thoroughly permeated my small place that it began to linger on me wherever I went. I started taking 2 showers a day, practically bathing in cologne every time I went out. My building manager told me that sometimes rats will crawl into the air ducts and get caught and die in there. Sometimes there's no way to get at them though, and you just have to wait for them to rot and fade away. I kept calling him to remind him to send someone to look into it, but he was evasive and kept insisting he would have smelled it too if it was as bad as I say. Like fermented fish in a gasoline soup, I told him, and getting worse all the time. I threatened to end my lease early if he didn't get it fixed, and then he started accusing me of making it up just to get out of paying rent. I was so angry when I got off the phone. I immediately started calling my neighbors in the surrounding apartments. The manager might be able to ignore me, but he couldn't ignore all of us if we complained together. I was shocked when one person after the next told me they didn't smell it though. I gradually realized the smell must really be confined to my room, which seemed like remarkably lousy luck. I searched the place from top to bottom, opening every cupboard, shining a light into the AC vents, moving the furniture around to look beneath, but never found a single clue. I must have been breathing heavier from the exertion and frustration, because the scent was becoming suffocating. It was like my face was buried in a dead animal, with blood and decaying matter dribbling into my mouth and down my throat with every inhalation. That's when I began to think my manager might have been right, and that it was all in my head after all. Desperate and exhausted, I decided to go to the doctor to get my nose checked. I could tell by the way the receptionist drew away from me that the cologne wasn't enough to cover the lingering smell. I spent a long time in the little waiting room, and when the doctor opened the door he immediately slammed it shut again, coughing and wheezing in the hallway. That gave me a certain satisfaction as I realized I wasn't just hallucinating the whole thing. The satisfaction vanished when the doctor returned wearing a face mask. He asked me to remove my shirt. His eyes narrowed as he critically inspected my clean and healthy body. "I'm glad there's nothing wrong with my nose at least," I said, half jokingly. "Your nose is fine. I'm more worried about your eyes," he told me very seriously. I started to tell him my eyes were fine, but caught my breath at the sharp sting of him picking at my stomach with a gloved hand. I watched in disgust as a flap of my skin easily peeled away, crumbling into dust like a decaying log. The brain can sometimes suppress knowledge that is too traumatic to deal with, but I've never heard of the visual system doing the same. "How long did you say your skin has been rotting off?" Somehow I hadn't noticed except from the smell, although no sooner had he said the words that I noticed how my gray and sagging skin came sloughing off at the slightest touch. One night after school I met my boyfriend at the gym like I did every day. I had goals I wanted to reach faster seeing it was my senior year. I want to do a chin-up. I've always been a heavier set gal, thanks to the more women features of me, so lifting my body was always a hard thing to do. But I wanted to seeing as I could deadlift my own body weight. I tried and tried but I couldn't get above the bar. Defeated we left the gym and went out separate ways as usual. I had called my best friend and honestly cried about it. He said we could meet at the McDonald's across the street and just hang out to raise my spirits. I accepted and turned around on the path. By this time it was dark, so I stayed on the phone with him because I'm always scared to be by myself since sex trafficking had been at an all-time high. January of 2020. I passed this guy standing at a bench on his phone near the crosswalk. I acknowledge that he's there, but I'm not too alarmed. When the light flashes for me to walk, I then realized that he began to follow me. I picked up the pace and put my keys between my knuckles. My hair on my skin started to stand. I looked behind me to see that he was picking up his pace. I said loudly on the phone to my friend that I'm almost there, so excited to see you guys, in hopes to get him to back off. I could be jogging at this point when I cut through the busy parking lot of the McDonald's. The guy lost some distance. Now, as a side note, and this will make sense soon, I had a dream that night. It was my bedroom door. Someone was knocking on it, pretending to be my sister. She had a distinctive knock pattern, but I didn't answer, and I always keep my door locked for personal reasons. So after not answering the door, the handle began to shake and then pound, and then I woke up. And let me say that I never believed in dreams until this day happened. I get into the McDonald's. The light and people made me feel safe. I took a seat at the door, which could have been very stupid, but I had to see this man's face. He walked up to the door and actually stared at me for a couple of seconds, then walked away into the night. A guy came into the McDonald's and said he saw the whole thing and he called the cops. I don't think they ever caught him. All I remember was crying my heart out and having nightmares for weeks. My life all depended on a single door. And that's why I believe that sometimes dreams speak truth and warning, and I even still have nightmares to this day. You aren't going to believe me. I know you aren't. No one believes me. I was almost admitted once, sectioned under the 136 Act, taken away and medicated. I think now that it might have been better if I had been. I managed to explain it all away, told them I was fine and my neighbor shouldn't have called a wellness check. But I wasn't fine. I will never be fine, not now, not now. It's taken control of everything. I haven't been fine, anywhere close to fine, since I heard it. It's been over a year. It will be longer. When I first heard it, I thought I was imagining things, or that maybe my tinnitus was playing up, so I just ignored it. I don't think it liked being ignored. Sometimes I wonder if things would be better if I had listened the first time. Whether it wouldn't have destroyed me the way it has, and the way it will continue to do. I would say that I'll hear it until I die, but by now I'm sure that no one will notice my death. I'll just lie on the floor of my flat, and maybe once my flesh and cartilage has rotted and my ears are no longer there, maybe then I'll finally be rid of it. The second time I heard it, I thought a bird was stuck in the heating grate. The flats used to be an old house, and I'd heard about birds falling down the chimneys and getting stuck. So I unscrewed the grate and shone my phone torch into the dusty cavity, listening with interest to the noise. I couldn't see anything in there, nothing to suggest a misplaced crow or confused pigeon, so I shut the grate again. But the noise was insistent. It was like a scratching, something clawing against the plaster. I couldn't decide, then, if I thought it wanted to come out or not. I know now. I don't think it can come out. I don't think it could survive. Or maybe it could, and this is just how it has fun, pushing me to the edge until I'm a shivering wreck on my living room floor. Either way. The scratching went on for hours, endless, ceaseless scratching. I couldn't place where it was coming from, just that it didn't seem to tire. Eventually, I watched TV with volume on high, trying to drown it out. It worked, and after a while the scratching stopped entirely, but like I said, I don't think it liked me ignoring it. The third time I heard it, I was scared. It had been a week or so since the last time, and I contented myself with the idea that a mouse had gotten into the wall and had scrabbled around before dying, which, while disgusting, had pacified me. But when it started again, it was impossible to ignore. It moved through my flat faster than a mouse could, and it was higher too, around my chest height if I had to guess. I was terrified. The scratching wasn't consistent anymore either, it changed depending on what it was doing. I could hear it when it moved, like nails dragging slowly across the other side of the wall. I could track its progress. It was then that I decided it was a hand. I never heard any footsteps, but the scratching was loud and clear through the plaster that I could almost see its position. I called the police. When they came, I told them to listen, expecting them to look in horror at the corner, as I did when I heard it, but they just asked me what they were meant to be listening to. When I told them, gesturing to where the noise was coming from, they looked at each other skeptically and asked if I had used an illicit substances. I shooed them from my flat. The scratching lasted for 2 days, and when it ended I was exhausted. I had barely slept, kept awake by the terror, hearing it pass by my bed, scratching above me. My work suffered. My relationship suffered. In those 2 days I was so distracted I could barely hear a word my friends were saying. When I told them why, they just laughed. I felt like I was going insane. I even went and had my ears tested. I bought a carbon monoxide detector, and when they brought back nothing, I started recording it. I had hoped when I first tried it that the recording would be quiet. At least then I'd have had an answer. Auditory hallucinations, even then, seemed easier to deal with than the constant fear and confusion. After the third recording, I stopped. It was somehow worse to hear on recording. Maybe because it was playing over the top of the real thing, 2 shovels burying me instead of 1. After that, I rarely had a moment's reprieve. The scratching filled my flat all day and night. I could hear the thing moving around, sometimes fast, almost running, sometimes slow and languorous. The only thing I have to go on is the scratching, no footsteps, no breathing. Once I considered the possibility of rats or insects, but it didn't make sense. The scratching was too coordinated, too deliberate. It went on for months. Exhausted as I was, I couldn't work, couldn't focus. I didn't have a difficult job, just numbers and spreadsheets, but I was miserable and constantly on edge. I couldn't meet with people, and slowly but surely my friends dropped away, leaving me alone. I spent all my time in my flat, stalked by that infernal noise. After a month, I had been fired. I had no job, no friends. I was trapped all day, every day, trapped almost inescapably with that thing, that noise. I wanted to leave, but where would I have gone? By now it was getting colder outside, and I had no money, no friends. I was fraught with fear and fatigue, so getting another job was out of the question. I didn't understand what was happening or why. I thought it couldn't get worse. I thought my life would only be this eternal, inexorable scratching. But it could get worse. And it would. My light was on. I distinctly remember that the light was on, and that I had not turned it off. I had no intention of turning it off. As I was sitting there, on my floor, the lamp shining on the table, I heard the scratching. I hadn't heard it move down the wall before. It had always been at the same level, and so when I heard it descending down the wall towards the skirting board, my head snapped round to look so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. The scratching moved along the base of the wall to the socket, and then started scratching its way along the wire. I was past fear by this point, driven almost to madness by it, and so I just listened wildly, hearing it get closer to the lamp, and the bulb went out. It was like it couldn't keep its fingers still, scrabbling and scratching even as it moved back up the wire. But it had turned the light off. That's where I am now. My flat is almost always dark, my curtains scratch shut during the day, and lights scratched off at night. But I don't need light to know where it is. It scratches the pictures back and forth on the wall. It scratches my books off of shelves. I'm trapped in my own flat. It scratches the door locked. It scratched out my phone lines. It's like it stalks me in the dark and the cold, round and round in the walls, in the wires. It never sounds like two hands, just one, scratching around without rest or pause. I have no one and nothing but the scratching. I rarely sleep, I barely eat, not that I have much food left. I used to wonder about my rent, but now those things seem useless, tiny little thoughts compared to the scratching. I swear it gets louder every day, but it doesn't get any harder. There isn't any more pressure behind it. It's just loud, piercing, like the pattern is being scratched into my scalp. I don't understand how I'm even being allowed to type, but you need to believe me. I know you won't. No one does. No one ever will. But I promise there's something in the wall.